The Intellivision Sprint single-handedly could be the biggest advancement in Intellivision gaming technology since the original console was released. So I gotta tell you, and I'm not gonna wait till the end of the video, I recommend it, and it is something special. So let's get into it and find out why. So what is the Intellivision Sprint? Well, at its core, it's a system on a chip, and it provides emulation to run all the Intellivision games. Now, it comes bundled with 45 games from the original Intellivision library, plus Boulder Dash, which was I guess you would call it a third-party homebrew type of game that came out, I guess, later on down the road as a port for Intellivision. Now, I've got to say, it is different than what we saw in the flashback. And it is definitely different than the original Intellivision. And a lot of that comes from two important elements, okay? First off, the Intellivision Sprint has HDMI out. That's right, you can play your Intellivision games on your modern TV without any problem. And it gets better because it has, that's right, wireless removable controllers. And I've gotta say, these controllers are nice, with really nice tactile buttons on the side, so you're not going to get finger fatigue here from using these controllers. And get this, it takes the original overlays and it looks like the original controllers. In fact, if you compare them in size to the original controllers, they are the exact same size. And that is part of the reason that the Intellivision Sprint is actually closer in size here when we do a little bit of a comparison between all of them than we had with the flashback. Now, the flashback obviously did not have the controllers mounted on the console, and they connected through DB9s in the front. But when you compare it to the size of the original Intellivision, it is actually very close in size. Now, console itself has a few tricks up its sleeve. The biggest trick it has up its sleeve, other than the wireless controllers in the HDMI, is it has, that's right, a USB port. And this USB port allows you to plug in a USB stick that has the Intellivision games or ROMs of your choice to boot them and play them on the Intellivision, meaning in HDMI. Now, let's talk about this a little bit more. What this does is this allows access to homebrew content, and there is a lot of that. Now, I'm not going to get into talking about all the great games that have been made and all the interesting games that have been arrived for Intellivision, but it's suffice it to say it is one of the strongest homebrew communities that I've ever experienced ever since I saw Food Fight from the original Intellivision. Now, the picture quality of this is 720p. Very, very similar to the original Atari 2600 and the 7800 and the 2600 Pac-Man. Now, it uses the same system on a chip as the 7800 and the Pac-Man 2600. So controllers and things are very familiar to play on. So it is kind of an interesting offering in that regard because it uses the same, motherboard for all intents and purposes. Now, here's the thing that I think is really interesting too, is that a lot of the Atari controllers will pair with the Intellivision and work just fine. And because of the USB port, it opens the world to all kinds of new Intellivision content. And I gotta say, there are already Intellivision publishers lining up to offer Sprint versions that you can play this way. Now, if you'll remember a while ago, those that have been following the Marbs Man channel, my good friend Ghost Gamer Dad and I did a series where we refurbished my Sears Intellivision, my Telegames unit, and added RGB output so I could run it on my RetroTink scaler. This eliminates all that. You can take and copy your ROMs onto a USB drive, boot from the USB drive, and play them with the same carousel interface that we have in the console. So what's in the box of the Intellivision Sprint? First off, this is a plug-and-play solution. It uses modern HDMI output and modern USB-C power. It includes 2 wireless controllers like we've talked about. These are replicas of the disc controller that was included in the original Intellivision, and they dock directly into console to charge. But let's talk about the size of the console for a minute. When we compare all 3 consoles, you can see with the original Intellivision on the bottom and the Sprint in the middle and the flashback on top that the Sprint is almost as big as the original Intellivision. It is thinner, but almost as big, and that's due in fact to the fact that these replica controllers are exact. Speaking of the replica controllers, overlays are included for both controllers covering all 45 games. Now these are high quality plastic overlays that mimic the originals, and they slide right into the wireless controllers, and they also would work on regular Intellivision controllers. The box includes an HDMI cable and a USB-C power cable and a quick start guide. Now I gotta say, overall I do think that the Sprint is a little light. The console itself, it feels solid, but it is a little on the lighter side. The controllers are nice. They have great clicky buttons on the side, which I think is a great improvement, but you can still get that, horrible finger cramp feeling using the controller, but isn't that part of the fun? An AC power brick is not included, and you have to supply one. I'd recommend a high quality one. I used a 20-watt power brick from Anker during the testing, and there's a link in the description should you want to pick one up yourself. There is expansion options. When we look on the back of the console, in addition to the USB-C port for power, the 2 USB ports for the controllers, and the pairing buttons, there is a third USB port as well as the HDMI port. This third USB port is how you sideload your additional Intellivision games. It allows for the entire Intellivision library to be put on a USB stick and for the console to boot directly into this USB stick and utilize the carousel interface. Now, this is a route that they can use to add new games to the Intellivision Sprint. And we've already heard several third-party homebrew developers with great announcements of games that they are going to be making available in digital for Sprint owners. I do think that's a great thing, and that's something that I do think, is good to see here. And while people would prefer an FPGA solution that has a cartridge port, I gotta say, I think the fact that we've gotten to getting HDMI and wireless controllers and we can still sideload all of our Intellivision games is plenty for right now. Plaion and Atari have made no secret about the fact that if the console were successful, they would consider offering an Intellivision dumper similar to what they have done with the Atari 2600 and 7800 Plus. As a matter of fact, I can see them just knocking out the sides of the mold and building on this particular Intellivision replica as their base to add a cartridge port should they decide to do so. The good news is that the future is bright for the Sprint. So let's talk about what's on the Sprint. So let's talk about the Sprint in action. First of all, the Sprint uses a really elegant carousel interface. Now, I should point out that this interface is 16:9, so it is going to be in full screen mode on your TV. So when the game actually runs on the emulator and boots, it will shift from the 16:9 mode that you have here into a 720p 60 mode, which is how the games are presented. Now, you have options within the options to change the mode from 16:9 to 4:3, and I like the fact that you can do this. Now, all the video that we've used here was filmed in the authentic 4x3. But I will warn you that some games will have space on not only the sides, but the top and bottom as well to give it the most authentic presentation possible. The 45 games included in the base are a variety of games from the original Intellivision library. I would say it represents a great selection of titles, including a lot of titles that were released in the later years of Intellivision, including some titles that are high dollar titles if you buy them physical. For example, Spiker Volleyball was one that came out towards the end that fetches a pretty penny in physical should you buy it. Now, the games are all presented in this carousel interface, and you can scroll through to select the games. Now, what I also think is really cool here is that when you press the option here to look at the game, you're presented with the controller, so you see what the buttons do, you see what the overlay does, and it all breaks it down for you. And if you want to take it one step further, there's a QR code in the upper left that you can scan, and that QR code will take you to the manual for the game. So it is a very good experience being able to know what the game is and what it does. And I do like the little summaries that we have in the upper corners, and I think that that's really a great way of presenting the games. The games overall, I've got to say, I played the number of them, never had a problem with any of them. They all seem to work okay, and I really enjoyed the presentation and the look. I gotta say, I think that Plaion and Atari have really focused hard here on trying to make the user experience as plug and play as possible. So let's talk about the rest of the games. That's right, all of the other Intellivision games that are not part of the 45 that are included with the Sprint. If you have access to the original Intellivision game ROMs, you can load those up on a USB stick. Now, what I think is even more interesting is that a game manager has been released to help you assemble the artwork and the pieces that you need to make a USB stick of your own that will have all the artwork, all the overlays, and all of the pieces to make the carousel look just like the original 45 that are included with the Sprint. Now, you may have to Google this a little bit, and that information definitely is out there. But what I can show you here, this is the 125 original Intellivision games from the USB stick. Once the ROMs are on the USB stick, it is as simple as inserting the USB stick into the USB port and booting the console. Now, I also might add here that I tested using the 1.1 firmware for the console, and the firmware update process is very simple as well. You take the update.zip file, copy it to a USB stick, make sure there's nothing else on the USB stick, insert the USB stick into the console, and turn it on. It's that simple to update it, and I experienced no issues with the update. Once I had my 125 ROMs, as you can see here on my Intellivision, I was able to get access to many of the third-party games that are not part of the 45. Now, I've got to be honest with you, if I have any criticism at all, it would be that none of the third-party games are really included as part of the 45. That means no Pitfall, no River Raid, no Demon Attack, and those are only some of the third-party Intellivision titles that I do think are missing here. But you can get your whole 125 ROM collection on a USB stick and access it very simply, as you see here.
So that's the Intellivision Sprint. Now let's talk about the pros and cons. First off, HDMI output. First time ever, easy way to get to HDMI and get your Intellivision content on a modern TV. Just make sure the port's in game mode. Second, I can't say enough about the wireless controller. Being able to replicate the Intellivision controller experience wirelessly with good accuracy, I've got to say I'm impressed. I mean,
it works pretty well, and it makes the experience much better. Now, the third thing, and I can't stress this enough, the fact that you can actually fill up your own USB stick with ROMs, insert that into the USB port, and use the emulator to run those Intellivision games out the HDMI on the Sprint is a huge advantage. Well, it doesn't have the cartridge port. This is a good alternative to get you where you need to go. Overall, I find the Intellivision Sprint a highly recommended addition. If you want to explore the Intellivision library, this is an excellent way to do it on a modern TV. And it sure does put the damper on all the money I spent on getting my original Intellivision to RGB so I could run it out my RetroTink over HDMI. But I will say that I do think if the popularity continues, they will look at doing a cartridge-based emulation dumper similar to what you've seen in the 2600 Plus and the 7800 Plus. But I have to say, as a first product and the first new Intellivision product in a long time, this is a great piece of gear and highly recommended. Now, some may be scared off by the price. I gotta say though, you know, when you add the wireless controllers and the extra overlays and all the extra stuff that they give you here, you know, I can understand how it gets to this price point. But no matter, I'd still recommend it. Maybe try to catch it on sale if you can. My name is Barbs. Now, if you want to buy an Intellivision Sprint, consider supporting the channel and using the link in the description. I sure would love to have your support. And if you'd subscribe, that would be really great. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.